In tonight's episode, we explore 3 terrifying encounters from across Asia, each one steeped in legend, soaked in mystery, and still whispered about today. The first story takes us deep into the Malaysian jungle, to a place that shouldn't even exist on a map. It began as a routine expedition, a team of researchers tracing the path of ancient trade routes along the border of Malaysia and Indonesia. But what they found in the jungle wasn't history. It was something older. Something still alive. The trees were dense, the signal was gone, and then came the scent, frangipani, sweet, rotten, impossible. There were no flowers, no birdsong, just the silence, pressing in like a warning. Their guide stopped walking, and when he spoke, his voice cracked. He said, "Don't look into the trees, and whatever you do, don't answer if you hear a baby cry." The team had flown into Kuching, then driven for hours along narrow dirt roads that grew more like tunnels with each mile, swallowed by the rainforest. No towns, no signs. Just green walls and the hum of insects growing louder. They were there to document remnants of forgotten trade routes once used by spice merchants. Supposedly, the paths were still faintly visible if you knew where to look. There were 4 of them, 3 researchers, and 1 local guide named Rafiq. He didn't speak much on the way in, just watched the trees as if they were watching back. Eli, the youngest of the crew, joked about ancient treasure and jungle spirits. The others laughed, but Rafiq didn't. They made camp just before sunset. No fire. Rafiq insisted on it. The air was thick and heavy, buzzing with humidity. But as night fell, it got strangely cold. Still, even the crickets stopped. That's when they first noticed it. The smell, sweet and too strong, like rotting flowers left in a sealed room. They searched for a source. Nothing. No blossoms. No fruit. Just the jungle, breathing quietly around them. Rafiq stared into the trees for a long time, then turned to the group and said something that didn't sound like a joke. He told them never to stare too long into the canopy. And never, under any circumstance, to respond to a crying sound at night. When asked why, he simply replied, "Because it's not a baby, and it knows when you listen." The first night passed without incident. No sounds, no movement, just the suffocating silence and the scent of frangipani that never seemed to leave. By morning, the group felt uneasy, though no one said it aloud. Eli looked tired, his eyes sunken. He said he'd had strange dreams of a woman floating just beyond the trees, her hair hanging over her face, her body swaying like it wasn't attached to bones. They brushed it off, probably just the jungle playing tricks. But when they checked the camp perimeter, they noticed something odd. Small piles of stones had been arranged outside their tents. Perfectly stacked, 4 of them, 1 by each sleeping bag. Rafiq looked pale. He muttered a prayer under his breath and kicked the stones away. They hiked deeper that day, following a dried-out riverbed. It was rough terrain, but manageable. Until midday, when the canopy thickened unnaturally, the sunlight vanished almost instantly. They had to use headlamps, something Rafiq insisted was unheard of in that region. Even he looked unsettled. Then came the whisper. It was soft at first, like leaves brushing together. But Eli froze. His expression went blank, and he tilted his head, listening. "Did you hear that?" he asked. No one else had. "It sounded like a baby. Just for a second." The others glanced at each other. Rafiq didn't speak. He just turned them around, said they were done for the day. No argument, no explanation. That night, things shifted. While setting up camp, one of the tents collapsed. The poles were bent, snapped clean in the middle, like something had stepped on them, but there were no footprints, no signs of wildlife. Nothing but crushed earth and a sharp increase in that sweet, nauseating smell. Eli didn't eat that night. He kept looking at the trees, muttering that they were moving when no wind was blowing. When the others finally turned in, he stayed outside, saying he needed fresh air. Just before sleep, someone thought they heard a giggle. High-pitched, human, but not quite. No one got up to check. By the 3rd day, the jungle felt like a trap. Every direction looked the same. Twisted trees, thick vines, shadows that didn't move right. Even the GPS glitched, showing them looping in circles despite hiking in a straight line. Rafik grew tense. He stopped using landmarks and instead tied red fabric to branches. The others joked about breadcrumbs. Rafik didn't laugh. At noon, they reached what looked like an old stone marker. Moss-covered, half-buried. Rafik froze when he saw it. He spat on the ground and backed away, whispering words in Malay. None of them understood. "What is it?" someone asked. He said the stone marked a place where the jungle doesn't forget, where something still waits. That night, the real horror began. Eli didn't come back to camp. He'd gone to collect water, just 10 minutes away. When they found his boots, they were still upright, still laced, but soaked in blood, as if whatever took him had slipped his feet out like a child undressing a doll. No drag marks, no trail, just the boots. The air turned thick with perfume, too strong to be natural. Rafik trembled. He said they'd broken a rule, but wouldn't say which one. Then, out of the darkness, came the crying. Louder now, clear, a baby, wailing somewhere deep in the trees. Two of the team moved toward it. Rafik blocked their path. His face looked like stone. "That's not a child," he said. "It's what comes before she arrives." "She who?" He didn't answer. He just lit a stick of something that smelled of ash and metal and began circling the camp with it, whispering fast, panicked prayers. But it didn't help. They didn't sleep. Something moved around the tents. They heard footsteps, breathing, the occasional rustle, like fingernails dragging across nylon. At one point, someone looked out, only for a second, and swore they saw long black hair hanging from the branches, dripping, as if it had just climbed down from the trees. By the fourth night, their nerves were shredded. Eli was still missing. The crying hadn't stopped. It came at random hours, sometimes far off, sometimes right beside the tents. But no matter how close it sounded, nothing was ever there. Then came the scratching. At first, it was soft, a faint brushing sound. But within minutes, it turned violent. Something was clawing at the fabric of the tents, trying to tear them open, not slashing, peeling, like fingers unzipping flesh. One of the crew screamed. Rafik yelled for everyone to stay inside. "Don't move, don't speak!" He sat cross-legged outside the largest tent, hands trembling as he scattered ashes in a circle around them. His voice cracked as he chanted something fast, almost desperate. And then everything went quiet. No wind, no insects, no breathing, just stillness. Then, laughter. A soft, broken laugh, like it came from lungs that didn't work anymore. It echoed from every direction. They couldn't tell if it was above, below, or inside their heads. One of the researchers couldn't take it. He bolted, ran out of the tent screaming Eli's name. They heard him for a few seconds, crashing through the brush. Then, nothing. Rafik didn't chase after him. He stared into the dark and whispered, "She's here." The fire flickered blue. The scent of frangipani hit them like a wave, overpowering, sickening. And then, from the edge of the light, something moved. A shape, pale, dripping with black hair that reached the ground. Eyes wide, mouth open, but no sound came from it. It hovered, watching, and then vanished, like smoke pulled backward into the trees. No one slept, no one spoke. They sat in silence until dawn, knowing something had crossed over that night. Something ancient and hungry. By sunrise, only 3 of them were left. Rafik refused to move until the fog lifted. He was pale, drenched in sweat, and looked like he hadn't blinked all night. When asked what they had seen, what that was, he finally spoke. He said the jungle was older than memory, that certain places were marked, not on maps, but in the stories of those who still listened, and what they had disturbed was one of those places. He said her name once, softly, Pontianak, a woman who died violently, buried under a banana tree while still pregnant. Her soul, unable to pass on, had rotted into something else. Sweet-smelling decay, frangipani perfume, long hair, crying that lures you off the path. Rafiq said, if you answer, she follows. If you search, she feeds. And once she's chosen someone, there's no unchoosing. The stone they passed, he explained that it was a grave marker, not just for a person, but for a boundary, a warning to the living, do not enter. But they had. They'd stepped over it like it was just a rock. The stacked stones outside their tents, a counter. She had marked them one by one. They begged Rafiq to take them out, to lead them back. He agreed, but only after burning their clothes, erasing their scent, and offering a final prayer at the riverbank. As they left, none of them looked back. Not even once. Rafiq said, if you look for her, she'll look for you too. No one asked what happened to the ones who ran. Deep down, they already knew. The jungle had taken its payment. And it wasn't finished. They made it out 2 days later, barely speaking, barely sleeping. Back in Kuching, the team scattered. One returned home and quit the project entirely. Another refused to talk about what happened, claiming it was all stress-induced hallucination. But the strangest was Rafiq. He disappeared. No message. No forwarding address. Locals said he left town quietly, left no trace. And Eli? They never found his body. Just his notebook, weeks later, mailed anonymously to the university. Inside were frantic sketches. Trees with eyes, a woman's face twisted in agony, and over, the same words scratched into the margins. Pontianak. The final page had a crude map, a trail winding back toward the jungle, but it ended abruptly with a single phrase written in shaking hand. She's still following. And the paper reeked, overwhelmingly, of frangipani. If you thought the jungle was unforgiving, wait until you hear what we found next. Because our second story takes us even deeper into the unknown, this time in the Philippines, where the trees don't just hide secrets, they bleed them. Locals in the Visayas gave us a warning, one we should have listened to. Stay out of the forest after dark. Things fly, they said, but we thought they meant bats. We were searching for old colonial ruins. What we found instead was a house that shouldn't have still been standing, and definitely shouldn't have been breathing, because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes the monsters in the stories grow wings. Let's move on to the second encounter. They were 3 architecture students from Manila, spending their summer documenting remnants of Spanish colonial structures in the Visayas. Old churches, watchtowers, mansions swallowed by jungle. It was meant to be academic, a passion project. The locals had warned them, not directly, but in passing. Strange sayings, half jokes that weren't really jokes. Stay out of the woods after sunset. Don't look up if you hear wings. Don't speak her name. They laughed it off. Superstition, they thought. Stories meant to scare tourists. On the 3rd day, they heard about a stone house deep in the forest. No one lived there. No one ever had, according to the village elders. But people still stayed away, not because of ghosts, because it was alive, they said. It took them half a day to find it. The trees grew thicker with every step, vines like ropes hanging from above, and then it appeared, wedged between 2 hills like it had grown there. Crumbling stone walls, shattered glass, a roof half covered in moss. The air felt wrong, still and heavy. They joked at first, posed for photos. One of them launched a drone to get overhead shots. That's when the tone shifted. Inside the house, there was no furniture. Just dust, vines, and shattered tile. But it wasn't empty. They heard it clearly. Breathing. Not theirs. Not wind. Not anything they could explain. Deep, wet, breaths coming from the walls. And suddenly, it didn't feel like they'd found the house. It felt like the house had found them. At first, they tried to rationalize it. Old buildings creak, stone holds heat. Maybe it was just the air settling, or an animal trapped inside the walls. Anything but what it sounded like. Slow, deliberate breathing, rising and falling like lungs pressed against the floor. The drone hovered overhead, buzzing faintly. One of the students, Luis, watched the feed on his phone. His face went pale. "Something moved," he said. The others leaned in. On the roof, something had crawled across the cracked tiles. Not walked. Crawled, dragging itself like it didn't have legs. They reversed the footage, frame by frame. There it was. A pale shape, thin arms, long hair, something dark trailing behind it, glistening. Entrails. The camera glitched. The feed went black. Inside the house, the breathing stopped. Louis stepped back toward the door. "Let's go," he said. But the other two were still trying to figure it out. They didn't feel fear yet, just confusion. Then the smell hit. Metallic and sweet, like blood mixed with rotting fruit. It came from upstairs. They never planned to go up, but their curiosity was stronger than their fear. The staircase groaned under their weight. The walls were lined with old portraits, faces scratched out, frames hanging crooked. At the top was a door, closed. No wind, no light, but they could hear something on the other side, not breathing anymore. Something wet, dripping. One of them reached for the handle. Louis slapped his hand away. "You don't open doors in places like this," he said. They backed down, fast. Outside, the forest was silent. Too silent. No birds, no wind, no insects. When they returned to the clearing, the drone had landed itself, battery dead. But the screen showed a single frozen frame. The house, the roof, and something crouched at the edge, smiling, waiting, as if it had known they would look. That night, back in their homestay, no one spoke much. They sat in silence, reviewing the drone footage frame by frame. What they saw wasn't just disturbing, it was impossible. The figure on the roof had no legs. Her torso ended in a twist of torn flesh, her organs dangling like vines. Her arms were too long, her mouth too wide, her tongue stretched outward like it was reaching for the lens. In the background, a whisper. None of them remembered hearing it on sight, but on the footage, clear as day, a soft, hissing voice spoke a single word. Manananggal. Luis paused the video. His hands were shaking. The host of the homestay, an older woman named Aling Rosa, saw the freeze frame on their screen as she walked past. She froze. Her face went pale. "You went into the forest?" she asked. They nodded. She took the phone without asking, stared for a moment, then made the sign of the cross. "You need to leave tomorrow," she said. "Burn what you filmed. And if you hear anything at night, anything at all, you don't look outside, you don't open your mouth." She listens for breathing. They asked her who the woman was. Aling Rosa didn't answer. She just said, "Some things don't stay in one piece. Some things learn how to split." The power went out that evening, just for a second. But when it returned, the drone footage had been corrupted. The screen glitched. The files began deleting on their own. One of the students swore he saw a shadow move past the window. That night, they tried to sleep, but the breathing returned. Not in the house. Right outside the window, a heavy, wet exhale. One of them covered his ears. Another reached for his phone flashlight. But Luis whispered, "Don't move. Don't speak." They lay there, paralyzed, listening, until something tapped on the window pane. Once, twice, then dragged its fingers all the way across, like nails on wet glass. At 3:17 in the morning, the breathing stopped. All at once. No wind, no sounds. Just an eerie, unnatural silence. Then came the scratching, soft at first, from the ceiling, as if something was dragging itself slowly across the roof. The sound of skin slapping tile, bone scraping against stone. Louis sat up, his face pale, drenched in sweat. He mouthed the words, "She's here." The lights flickered once, then died completely. They grabbed their flashlights, but none of them turned on. Phones wouldn't unlock. Batteries drained. Then the smell returned. Rot, iron, fruit. And something else, like something dead, trying to stay fresh. From the far corner of the ceiling, they heard a noise that didn't belong in any house. A wet rip. A tearing sound. And then something dropped. Not onto the floor, into the room. She was in two halves. The top half crawled forward, entrails dragging behind like ropes, tongue lashing out like a snake searching for warmth. Her eyes were black and endless, her fingers long and cracked like broken branches. No one screamed. They couldn't. Louis grabbed a blanket, threw it over the mirror across from the bed. "She comes through reflections," he whispered. "Always through reflections." They backed into the bathroom, barricading the door with a chair. Inside, no windows, no mirrors, just silence. And the sound of breathing, this time, from inside the bathroom. They turned. The sink was full of something black, thick, moving, bubbling like breath. Something was inside the pipes, trying to crawl through. They didn't wait. They kicked open the door and ran into the night. No lights, no people, just forest. And above them, the flap of wings. Not feathers, skin. They made it to the village just before dawn, barefoot, scratched and shaking. The first light revealed what they couldn't see in the dark. Claw marks on their backs, deep gashes down their shirts like something had reached for them from above. Aling Rosa was already awake. She didn't ask what happened. She simply opened the door and handed Louis a clay bowl filled with crushed garlic, salt, and oil. "You've seen her now," she said. "That means she's seen you." They begged her to explain. She told them the story, villagers still whispered, about a woman who made a deal to survive childbirth, alone in the woods, long ago. Something answered, something hungry. It let her live, but only if she left half of herself behind. Now she hunts at night. Her top half flies. Her bottom half stays hidden, rooted in the shadows. If you find it, you can kill her. If you don't, she follows. The breathing, the smell, the whispers, they were signs, warnings. The drone had caught her true form, and once seen, she never forgets your scent. They asked why the house still stood. Rosa said no one dares tear it down. The vines grow back overnight, tools rust, workers disappear. "It's not a ruin," she said. "It's a nest." They stayed long enough to burn their clothes, bury the drone's remains, and have salt rubbed into every scratch. Before leaving, Rosa looked them each in the eye and said, "If you ever smell fruit where there's none, or hear breathing in a silent room, don't look up." They drove away as the sun rose. But behind them, the trees swayed without wind. And something flew just above the canopy. They never spoke of it again. The footage was gone, the gear destroyed. They finished their project using safer ruins, safer stories. But some things don't stay buried. 2 weeks later, one of the students went missing in Manila. His apartment was locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. Just one thing out of place, his mirror shattered from the inside out. And the sink? Filled with thick, black water. Louis doesn't sleep much anymore. He keeps salt at every window, garlic above the door. And sometimes, just before dawn, he hears it again. That wet, heavy breathing. No footsteps, no knocks, just breath. Close. Like something waiting just above the ceiling, and always, without fail, the faint smell of rotting fruit. He doesn't look up. He never looks up because he knows she's still flying. So far, we've wandered through jungles that breathe and forests that fly. But our final story tonight takes us somewhere different. Somewhere quieter. A remote village in Thailand that wasn't on any map and definitely wasn't part of the plan. We were told to go there by a monk. Just one line. They feed something there, and what we found wasn't violent, it wasn't loud, it was curious. A shrine that didn't seem meant for the living. Offerings that kept vanishing, and the sense that we were being watched, not by something big, but by something small. Whispers turned into fights. Objects disappeared, and when the scratching started, we realized we weren't alone. Let's move on to the third and final encounter. They were a small documentary crew from Bangkok, 3 filmmakers, a translator, and 1 sound tech working on a series about Thailand's lesser-known ghost festivals. Most of their stops had been pre-approved, filmed in broad daylight with smiling locals and harmless traditions. But then they met the monk. He was old, quiet, and blind in one eye. When asked if he knew of any forgotten rituals, he simply said, "There is one village. It's not on your list, but they feed something there." Curious, and maybe a little cocky, they went. The drive took them deep into the countryside. The roads narrowed. The air felt still, pressed down by heat that didn't lift even after sunset. When they arrived, the village looked too quiet. No children, no animals, just adults who watched from doorways and said nothing. Their translator asked about the local festival. No one answered. One man nodded toward the trees. That's where they found the shrine. It stood alone in a clearing. Tall and strange, made of dark wood, carved with childlike figures, thin bodies, round heads, long arms that reached upward. Bulls sat at the base. Inside them, milk, coins, sweets, all fresh. One of the crew chuckled. Offerings for forest spirits? But no one laughed. That night, things began to shift. Their money disappeared from their bags. A necklace vanished from the sound tech's neck while she slept. She blamed the others. The crew turned on each other. And outside, just beyond the firelight, came the sound of giggling. Soft, small, not friendly. The first night passed in tension. No major events, no screams in the dark, just quiet paranoia and a growing sense that something was off. By morning, 2 cameras were missing, no signs of forced entry, just empty tripod stands where they'd been set up to capture sunrise footage of the shrine. One crew member, Niran, swore he'd heard rustling in the grass just before dawn, tiny footsteps, like children running barefoot. But when he stepped outside, there was nothing there. The bowls at the shrine had been refilled. Fresh milk, fresh coins, even though no one had seen anyone approach. Then the scratching began. First, on their tents. Soft, quick scrapes that stopped as soon as they stepped outside. They assumed it was animals. Maybe monkeys. Maybe rats. But when the translator, Marley, checked the fabric of her tent, she found the marks weren't random. They were patterns. Circles, spirals, and handprints. Too small to belong to any of them. One by one, the crew began to snap at each other. Suspicion bloomed fast. Accusations flew about the stolen gear, the missing necklace, the missing footage. No one could sleep, and the less they slept, the more they noticed things. Shadows darting just out of view, laughter echoing from the trees. And in the dirt around the shrine, tiny footprints, bare, only a few inches long. When Marley asked the villagers again, one woman broke. She looked over her shoulder, lowered her voice, and whispered a single word, Toyol. Marley froze. She knew the word. Spirits, not ghosts, not demons. Children, the stolen souls of unborn babies, raised through black magic to serve their masters. To steal, to follow, to play. That night, no one left their tents, but something left fingerprints on the inside. By the third night, the crew was unraveling. They tried to pack up and leave early, but the van wouldn't start. The engine had worked perfectly the day before. Now, it just clicked over and over, no matter what they did. The fuel gauge read full, the tires were fine, but something was holding them there. That afternoon, they reviewed what little footage they had left. And there it was. One short clip taken near the shrine, recorded without anyone pressing record. A single frame. A pale, greenish, childlike figure crouched behind one of the carved posts. Its head was too round, its smile too wide. It had no eyes, just two empty sockets staring at the camera like it knew it was being watched. The clip ended in static. That night, the shrine was different. The offerings had been replaced with new ones. Juice boxes, candies still in wrappers, an old doll missing an eye. None of the crew had left them. Marley confronted the village chief the next morning, demanded answers, demanded to know what they were feeding. The chief didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away. But one of the elders pulled her aside. Old, half-deaf, half-blind. He leaned in and whispered, "Don't let them get bored. If they get bored, they come looking for fun." That night, things spiraled. The tents collapsed one by one, the stakes pulled from the earth by unseen hands. One crew member woke up screaming tiny handprints were pressed all over her chest and neck. The translator, Mali, had bite marks on her legs, small, shallow, but unmistakably human. They tried to sleep inside the van, but the windows fogged up. On the glass, drawings, smiley faces, spirals, stick figures, all drawn with greasy little fingers. And just before dawn, the whispering started. Not in Thai, not in any language they recognized. But it was coming from inside the van. Around 2 a.m, the van began to shake. Not from wind, not from movement, but from something climbing on it. The crew froze, breath held. Scratching started again, this time not playful, sharp, aggressive. Nails dragging across the roof, tapping along the windows in a rhythm that almost sounded like counting. 1, 2, 3, then laughter. Giggling, dozens of little voices, inside, outside, all around. Someone opened their mouth to scream, but Marley clamped a hand over it. She whispered, "Don't play with them. That's what they want." A flash of movement darted past the window, then another, something green, something small. Suddenly, the car door on the driver's side creaked open, on its own. And in the reflection of the rearview mirror, they saw it. Not just one, dozens. Pale, naked, childlike creatures with bloated bellies, rotting skin, wide grins, and black hollow eyes, crawling on the van, crawling on each other, watching. The crew started crying, praying, whispering apologies. Marley grabbed a pack of coins and a juice box from the floor and shoved it out the door. The creatures stopped, watched, then vanished. Just like that. The air cleared, the windows unfogged, the laughter stopped. They sat in silence, too afraid to breathe. It wasn't until hours later, when the sun began to rise, that someone noticed the shrine again. It had changed. At the very top, a new carving had appeared. 5 small figures, hunched, grinning. And beneath them, 5 human shapes carved with eerie detail, one holding a camera, one wearing Marley's necklace, one holding out a juice box. When the sun fully rose, they didn't wait. They left the shrine behind, abandoned the broken van, and walked. No one spoke, no one looked back. It took most of the day to reach the next village, where they found help and finally someone willing to talk. An older woman at a roadside food stall saw their condition, saw the fear in their eyes, and sat them down. "You went to that village," she said. Not a question, a statement. She explained that long ago, a woman in that village lost all her children to illness. Grief drove her to black magic. She summoned the Toyol. Not spirits of her own children, those were gone, but the trapped souls of unborn ones, small, hungry, mischievous at first, but over time they grew clever and cruel. The villagers learned it was easier to live with them than to resist, feed them, entertain them, leave toys and coins. Ignore the sounds at night. The shrine was never for the gods, it was for them. Marley asked what would happen now that they'd seen the Toyol, spoken about them, filmed them. The woman's face darkened. "They remember who notices," she said. "They like attention, and when they're bored, they find new games, new people." As they waited for a ride back to the city, one of the crew checked her phone. Somehow, it had recorded the entire night. No video, just audio. Laughter, scratching, whispers. And then, near the end of the clip, a tiny voice, clear as day. "Don't forget to play." They flew back to Bangkok the next morning. No more shrine visits, no more filming. The project was shelved, and no one ever spoke about that village again. Except for Marley. 2 weeks later, she started receiving packages. No return address. Just little boxes, each one wrapped in banana leaves, tied with string. Inside the first was a single coin. The second held a broken camera lens. The third, a juice box. Still sealed. Still cold. She tried to burn them. They didn't burn. Then came the noises. Tiny footsteps at night, coins rolling across the floor, laughter echoing from her hallway, even when the lights were off. She doesn't sleep much anymore. She keeps her windows locked, her mirrors covered, and a bowl of milk beside her door, just in case. And every night, before bed, she whispers, "Not tonight," and listens, carefully, for the sound of small hands tapping back. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload at least 3 times a week. Wish you all the best.